Top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. David Cameron is back in the cabinet, but will his involvement with Greensill Capital overshadow his work and that of the government? With just over a week until the autumn statement, a new survey suggests last month saw business confidence sink to its lowest level this year. And Royal Mail is fined more than £5 million for missing delivery targets. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King, on a busy day in Westminster. Lots of changes in government, but will anything help improve the flatlining economy? Business confidence in the UK fell last month to its lowest level this year, and that was despite non-staff cost inflation for businesses falling to its slowest rate in nearly 3 years. Well, those are the main findings in the latest UK Business Outlook report, the quarterly survey compiled by the consulting giant Accenture and S&P Global. Well, joining me now is Rachel Barton. She's Accenture UK and Ireland's strategy consulting lead for Europe. Rachel, afternoon to you. Before we talk a little more about your survey, what about the reshuffle? Will anyone in business care very much?
Well, businesses all have different priorities, and I think what they care about mostly is certainty and consistency. So any government that is able to provide that and also give some hopeful outlook around investment is going to be welcomed by the business community.
Yeah, not a lot of certainty in housing, where they're on to their 16th minister since 2010.
Well, as I say, I think the main thing is to be able to give investment confidence. I mean, certainly from the results that we saw, there were some bright spots in the research. In fact, manufacturing saw a slight uptick and construction and transportation saw a slight uptick in confidence. So what's key now is to convert that confidence into action and start to think about how we can create investment capacity in order to grow new streams of revenue.
Yeah, I mean, the overall drop in confidence was due to the services sector. What do you think was pushing that?
Mainly hospitality, actually. So if we look at the results, manufacturing strong, mainly because they've lent in very heavily to new technologies. Services weaker, but driven dramatically by hospitality. A lot of those staycations that were being anticipated over summer didn't fully happen. And people are super mindful of the cost of living crisis and the ability for discretionary spend. So that's going to be a real watch area as we look forward.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, the uptick in construction, as you mentioned, because that's actually consistent with what we saw in the latest GDP figures.
Yeah, and if we look at the sector, I mean, 7 out of 14 showed an increase in confidence from the last round. What I'm talking to clients about as well is that while these are undoubtedly super challenging times for business, I mean, we can't get away from that. The macro is not the friend of business at the moment. There are two things that we've really got to take seriously. You know, the first one is you mentioned employment, and we are seeing a positive outlook around employment, but companies are grappling with these skill shortages, and we've got to think about reskilling, and that's what I'm talking to my clients about, particularly when it comes to some of these very in-demand skills. You talked about construction, but equally in the tech sector around cloud, AI, and data. And then research and development, I was actually disappointed that this declined from the last round of surveys, because this is so important to growth. So for all sectors, thinking about cost takeout, increasing in productivity, maybe using some of those technologies to find ways to continue to invest. That's what I'm talking to my clients about, and I know that that's what's at the top of their mind as well.
Interesting that inflation expectations are coming down. I mean, again, consistent with what we're seeing in some of the headlines.
Yeah, and inflation, you know, is coming down, and that's recognised by business. Of course, these skill shortages and high interest rates are still some of the anecdotal feedback that we had around the challenges facing business. So, and we also saw some levels of wage inflation creeping into the survey, but they've definitely calibrated. So now I think for business, control what you can control, take cost out, find ways to create investment capacity, fund new revenue streams, and, you know, and let's meanwhile watch the economic climate stabilise and a return to growth.
Now, as we've discussed before, this is a global survey that you carry out. It's worth pointing out that actually British business optimism is somewhat higher than both the global average and that in Europe.
It is, and I think it speaks to the level of resilience that we're seeing in British business. It was over double the European scores and higher than the global average. And France, for example, saw an 11-year low in this latest research. France and Germany, of course, are more vulnerable to the geopolitical situation and maybe some of the energy price shocks that we've seen. So I'd love British business to feel confident. These are not easy times, and we have to understand that. But we saw a good distribution of confidence across the regions as well, which is always reassuring. Now it's about converting that into action.
All right, Rachel, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Good to see you this afternoon. Thank you.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
Now, Reshuffle took nobody by surprise. Bringing back David Cameron caught everyone off guard. Rishi Sunak hopes to build a team to bring stability and grow the economy ahead of the next election. Jeremy Hunt, to that end, remains in the Treasury. But the introduction of the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, brings with it the whiff of financial scandal because of his links to the collapsed finance group Greensill Capital. Meanwhile, the country is in line for its 16th housing minister since 2010 and its 4th pensions minister in just over a year. Well, let's speak now to our political correspondent, John Craig, who's in Downing Street. John, we just heard there that what business really craves is stability, the government likewise. But does this reshuffle bring much of that?
Well, we've had so many reshuffles and so many prime ministers in the last few years. That's why we've had so many ministers in posts like housing, for example. Now, you mentioned pensions there, Ian. We still don't know who the new pensions minister is because Laura Trott, who is the MP for Sevenoaks in Kent, used to work for David Cameron, got an MBE in his resignation honours. Well, she's moving to number 11. She is going to be the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the number 2 to Mr Hunt. And by my calculation, there have been about 10 of those since the 2019 election. John Glenn, who moves over to Paymaster General, he's done the job for the past year. Before that, we had Ed Arger, Chris Philp, Simon Clarke, Steve Barclay, and then Rishi Sunak, of course, before he became Chancellor. So no stability there. We don't know who the pensions minister is. Is Laura Trott been sent into number 11 to keep an eye on Jeremy Hunt? Big week next week, don't forget, because, of course, it's the autumn statement, Mr Hunt. No, not new ministers. Thought it might be. We're still waiting. We've got all the cabinet now. We're on to ministers of state now. Who gets pensions will be crucial. One interesting one, Greg Hands goes back to becoming trade minister because he was the Tory chairman. Now he has presided over a disastrous set of by-election results for the Conservatives. He has almost certainly paid for that, but at least Mr Sunak has said, OK, you can have your old job back at trade. So I suppose you could argue, he says it's his 4th time doing that job, so I suppose you could argue that there's some stability there. But I think really, you're right. I mean, housing is the one that is an absolute shocker, 16 ministers. There are others, actually, other posts in government where there have been lots of different ministers under Johnson, Truss and now Sunak. But you're right. Not much stability.
Well done to you for remembering all those chief secretaries, John. I couldn't have done that. Thank you. Now, the most notable episode in David Cameron's post-Downing Street career until now has been his work as an advisor to Greensill Capital. After its failure in March 2021, it emerged that Mr Cameron, who was reportedly paid £720,000 a year by Greensill, had lobbied Rishi Sunak, then the Chancellor, after texting him to ask for financial help for the firm. Well, joining me now is the Washington Post journalist Duncan Mavin, who wrote a book, Pyramid of Lies, on the rise and fall of Greensill Capital. Duncan, great to see you this afternoon. For people who can't really remember the details, what was Greensill Capital and what did David Cameron do for them?
Yeah, so Greensill Capital was a new fund that was been running for a few years, and a few of us knew there was something wrong with it, but it got to be a pretty big size. It generated billions of dollars, and eventually it collapsed under the weight of a lot of speculation about whether it was a real business or not. David Cameron had worked for them for several years. He was essentially a sort of a door opener. He introduced Lex Greensill, who was the founder of Greensill Capital, to politicians and business people and really helped them grow the business.
Now, was he a particularly effective lobbyist and door opener?
Well, that's really questionable, I guess. I think in some places he was, right? So they made some inroads in places like Saudi Arabia. Cameron accompanied Lex Greensill on trips to Japan, where he got a massive investment from a big fund there. In other times, he was a less effective lobbyist, I guess. He worked a lot for Lex Greensill during COVID, trying to get access to various amounts of COVID bailout money. And he was rebuffed in some places. In other places, he got some access. And in fact, they got several £100 million worth of COVID bailout money.
Now, there are obviously a lot of investigations, for example, by the Serious Fraud Office into the failure of Greensill, lots of lawsuits as well. Does any of this have the potential to cause trouble for David Cameron?
Well, I think it does. I think it's a real worry for Cameron and for his new boss, Rishi Sunak, right? There are currently criminal investigations into Greensill Capital in Switzerland and in Germany. There is an ongoing SFO investigation into aspects of the Greensill business here in the UK. And there are multi-billion-dollar lawsuits all over the world related to Greensill. And each one of these is going to involve lots of sort of additional information that's going to come out about Cameron's role or what happened with the company. And each one is a potential kind of embarrassing moment for everybody involved in it, which obviously includes Cameron.
There isn't actually much suggestion, though, Duncan, correct me if I'm wrong, that David Cameron actually knew what was going on beneath the bonnet at Greensill. He didn't necessarily know the problems that were being stored up.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. The question, I suppose, is whether he should have known that. He was getting paid a lot of money. You mentioned his salary. He also got paid a lot of money in other ways through share options. And so, was it his responsibility to know what was going on? I think there were plenty of warning signs that there were problems with Greensill. My sources tell me that David Cameron was warned before he took a job with the company that this was a company that had some problems. And certainly, myself and others had written stories that outlined many of the problems that emerged later. So, yeah, I think you're right. His role was not in the parts of the business that were necessarily what people have alleged to have been fraudulent. But nevertheless, he was a senior figure in this company. And maybe, as a former prime minister, should have done a better job of finding out what was going on.
And worth pointing out, of course, in a parallel universe, Greensill Capital's floated on the stock market and David Cameron's made tens of millions of pounds from the IPO.
That's correct. I think none of us actually really know how much money David Cameron made from Greensill. Certainly, estimates have been sort of several £million. I think had Greensill got to IPO status, he stood to make a lot more than that, tens of millions, as you say, which is really an incredible amount of money, right? And, for the sort of work he was doing, I guess that was the value that Lex Greensill saw in having a former prime minister on staff.
Do you know whether he's read your book, Duncan?
I don't know. I'm sure he's seen it, though. He's on the cover.
All right, got to leave it there. Duncan, good to catch up with you again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Still to come here on Business Live, we'll have a look at how the markets have done this Monday afternoon. Stay with us.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
I've witnessed a remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
You got your political agenda.
No, it's honestly...
God love you.
And beyond the United States, I report from around the world.
This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. we take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem.
What do you think of ISIS? Everybody here, they know the truth of ISIS.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. Some other business news stories for you now. And the defence giant BAE Systems said today it remains on course to hit its full-year forecast as demand for its products and services remains strong at a time of heightening geopolitical risk. BAE said in the summer it expected to raise sales this year by between 5 and 7% and underlying operating profits by between 6 to 8%. It said that since then it had booked £10 billion worth of new orders, including some £3.9 billion related to the AUKUS submarine programme between Australia, the UK and the United States. Royal Mail's been fined £5.6 million by the communications regulator Ofcom for missing delivery targets. Under Ofcom's rules, each year Royal Mail must deliver 93% of first-class mail within 1 working day and 98.5% of second-class mail within 3 working days. But in 2022-23, Royal Mail delivered only 73.7% of first-class mail on time and some 90.7% of second-class mail on time. Royal Mail said its performance was affected by the long-running industrial dispute, which included 18 days of strike action, plus extreme weather and the closure of Stansted Airport's runway from January to March this year at various times. And shares of British Land have jumped by more than 5.5% after the UK's largest direct owner and operator of retail parks said its rents this year would rise by more than expected. The company, which owns the Broadgate Centre in the City of London and the Meadowhall Shopping Centre in South Yorkshire, said recent lettings had been at a 12% higher rent than previously, while the proportion of its properties occupied by tenants stood at 96%. Underlying profits for the 6 months to the end of September came in at £142 million, which was up 3.4% on the same period last year. Well, European stocks have made a positive start to the week, led by the healthcare sector. There's a picture in continental Europe, the MIB in Milan grabbing the yellow leader vest, up nearly 1.5%. Among the features today, Novo Nordisk recently rose 3% to a new all-time high after producing data at the weekend, suggesting its weight loss drug Wegovy also reduces the risk of heart disease. It's actually fallen 2% in the afternoon, though. Here in London, the FTSE 100 also in positive territory, up nearly 0.9% there, led by some of the big dollar earners. Among the leading percentage gainer, though, it's Phoenix Group, the long-term savings and retirement specialist, is ahead by some 6% or so after raising its full-year cash generation target. Viva and Legal in general are both up in sympathy. Outside the FTSE 100, mentioned them a moment ago, British Land, well, they've finished up, I think, nearly 3% on that trading update. To the downside, IT specialist Kainos is off some 25% as its half-year results disappointed, while the professional services specialist FDM Group is down by 18% on a downbeat trading update. Meanwhile, Dr. Martens has fallen to a new all-time low. That's on the back of a broker downgrade. Over on Wall Street, stocks have opened largely to the downside. Investors largely sitting on the sidelines ahead of tomorrow's US inflation data. Among the individual talking points, Tyson Foods is one of the big meat packers. Well, that is up 2%, despite a rather cautious trading update. On the foreign exchange markets, the big development today is that the dollar's hit a fresh one-year high against the Japanese yen. Sterling up by 2/5% against the dollar, though, up 1/4% against the euro. The euro, meanwhile, slightly ahead against the dollar. We're going to break into the markets now, I'm afraid, because we've got some words from David Cameron, the new Foreign Secretary, of course. Here he is.
Well, I know it's not usual for a Prime Minister to come back in this way, but I believe in public service. The Prime Minister asked me to do this job, and it's a time where we have some daunting challenges as a country. The conflict in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, and of course, I hope that 6 years as Prime Minister, 11 years leading the Conservative Party gives me some useful experience and contacts and relationships and knowledge that I can help the Prime Minister to make sure we build our alliances, we build partnerships with our friends, we deter our enemies, and we keep our country strong. That's why I'm doing the job, and I'm delighted to accept.
You have expressed publicly recently disagreements with the Prime Minister. Have you promised to button it? Is it a collective responsibility from here on in?
On the whole, as an ex-Prime Minister, I've tried to keep quiet about politics, stay out of politics. It's hard enough being Prime Minister without having your predecessors endlessly giving a running commentary. But look, of course, I've disagreed with some individual decisions, but politics is a team enterprise. I've decided to join this team because I believe Rishi Sunak is a good Prime Minister doing a difficult job at a hard time. I want to support him. I'm a member of the team and I accept the Cabinet collective responsibility that comes with that.
Let's explore what you've been doing since you were Prime Minister. The Treasury Select Committee accused you of a significant lack of judgment over your lobbying of ministers on behalf of the finance company Greensill. Why should voters trust your judgment now?
Well, the most important thing I've done since leaving office was to act as president of Alzheimer's Research and to raise millions of pounds and help our scientists to get closer to a diagnosis and a cure for something that affects almost 1 million people in our country. But today I resign from all of those things, from all of the businesses I've been helping and all the other things I've been doing, including being a professor at NYU. That all stops. I now have one job as Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, and I'm very proud to work with our Prime Minister to try and make sure our country can be as secure and as prosperous as possible.
I noticed you ducked my question on Greensill there. A specific answer to that question, the Treasury Select Committee branding a significant lack of judgment?
Well, I think all those things were dealt with by the Treasury Select Committee, by
right?
other inquiries at the time. And as far as I'm concerned, that is all dealt with and in the past. And I now have one job as Britain's Foreign Secretary, as part of Rishi Sunak's team, to try and make sure this country can be as secure and as prosperous in a difficult and dangerous world.
You're going to be Foreign Secretary in the House of Lords. It's not unprecedented, but it is unconventional. What do you say to the Speaker of the House of Commons, who has articulated a concern this afternoon about how you can be held to account when you can't appear in the House of Commons and face questions directly from MPs in there?
Well, I will be held to account in the House of Lords, where I have to account for myself and for the government, and of course Andrew Mitchell and a very talented team of ministers at the Foreign Office will be held to account in the House of Commons. I'll obviously appear in front of the House of Commons select committees as appropriate to answer the questions. And of course, this government, my role in it, all of that will be accountable to the electorate at the general election when it comes. But in the meantime, I want to do everything to strengthen our alliances, to work with our friends, to build those vital partnerships, to make sure our country is secure and prosperous in a difficult and dangerous world. That work starts now, and I've got to get on with it.
Well, that was David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, of course, now Foreign Secretary. I can just briefly bring you back to the market report. We're going to give you some details on Brent crude, which I think we can show you now. There you go, barrel of Brent crude. Sold off last week for the third consecutive week, but it's rallied today. Barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back at $82.52 a barrel. That is up just shy of 1.5% on the session. Apologies, we don't have time for any market analysis today. We had Victoria Scholar from Interactive Investment ready and primed to give us the latest, but unfortunately that is a pleasure deferred for another day. I'm back in the meantime at 11:30 tomorrow. I hope very much to see you then. In the meantime, do stay tuned. Coming up after this short break, it's the News Hour with Mark Austin. See you tomorrow. Cheerio.